Okay, I hope I hope you don't mind, so that those who may have Wi-Fi challenges along the way, don't worry, you're going to be able to follow the recording on your own later on. You will just have to send an email to catalystpds@gmail.com so that I can provide you with a link to the recording maybe by tomorrow. Well, that's right, by tomorrow evening for you there in Manila. And as I said, I'm giving this session for you here in Washington, D.C. I'm here to attend an international conference on character formation. Those of you who have attended some of my past seminars, most likely on character formation, you know that's what I've been giving. But after teaching Latin for 30 years, I realized, teka muna, sayang naman what I know about Latin, so might as well offer it also for those who are interested. And there were 50 of you who signed up. 40 or 39 are not yet here. Let's see if they will follow as we progress with a session. We're only going to have a 1-hour session today, and we have a lot of things to cover. And so I'd like to get straight into the discussion, okay? I am leaving the mic and chat box open for you. At any time of the presentation today, if you want to ask a question, please feel free to type in the chat box or raise your hand if you want to say something, to speak, to ask a question verbally. Okay, great. So I am now sharing screen. For those of you who have never attended any of my seminars in the past, my name is Man Rentoy. I finished AB Journalism and Literature and MA in Creative Writing and a PhD in Literature, all from the University of Santo Tomas, UST. And I also started a school in Iloilo City, that's Westbridge School. But since 1986, even when I was still in college, I already started teaching Latin. And in UANP, University of Asia and the Pacific, for a while, that was also the subject I was teaching, the MA Humanities students. I also taught Latin to students in Southridge, where I graduated high school, Northfield, Bannister Academy. Yeah, those are the schools where I taught Latin in. Okay, great. Let's get straight into the lessons. There are three main things I want to tackle with you. The first, of course, is pronunciation, how to pronounce Latin. And then we'll do a bit of vocabulary building because like in any subject, any language you teach or you learn, it's very important to memorize vocabulary words. And then we will, along the way, there will be many Roman stuff I will be sharing with you. Okay, just to make it clear, there are three types or three styles or three ways of pronouncing Latin. Okay, the classical or Roman, which most of the materials, in fact, available in the internet are classical pronunciation. And then there is the ecclesiastical, which is what you will hear when the Pope Francis, for example, celebrates Mass in Latin, or for that matter, anyone celebrating Mass in Latin from Rome, that is the pronunciation you're going to hear. And then there is the anglicized Latin, which is really the way Americans and Britons, the English-speaking people, the English pronounce Latin. And that's the most extant materials available in the internet. I'm not going to use classical or anglicized. We will focus on ecclesiastical Latin because that is the now more commonly acceptable and accepted pronunciation of Latin. Besides, I find the classical and the anglicized as almost like a how do you call this? Fake. I mean, synthetic, artificial Latin. Okay. So what I'm going to spend a lot of time in would be ecclesiastical. Just a quick difference between ecclesiastical and classical. In the classical pronunciation, C, letter C, is always pronounced as ka. Okay. Hard C, like letter K. And the other big difference is G in classical pronunciation is always like ga, like in garage as the first letter G. In ecclesiastical, on the other hand, it depends on the vowel that follows the letter C and G. So that's the big difference first between classical and ecclesiastical. So let's go to ecclesiastical. The alphabet is practically the same except for two letters that do not exist in Latin, letter J and W. J is replaced by I in Latin, and W is like U. Or sometimes you will hear it as V. Well, more than that when you actually see examples of the uses. That's why if you look at the crucifix, on top of the crucifix, you will see this INRI, which really stands for Jesus Nazarenus Rex Judaeorum, Jesus the Nazarene, King of the Jews. You don't see JNRJ on top of the crucifix. Instead, what we see is INRI. Okay. By the way, alphabet, as you know, comes from the first two letters of the Greek alphabet. So alpha and beta. That's where we get the word alphabet. Okay, let's continue on with pronunciations. I'm going to rattle off many of these rules, but there's no other better way to learn pronunciation than actually reading texts in Latin according to ecclesiastical pronunciation. So here are some more main points of ecclesiastical or church Latin pronunciation. Q is always pronounced as qua, qui, quo, quo, which is very different, if you notice, from Spanish, which is like porque, que, qui. In Latin, on the other hand, it's always pronounced as qui, qua, que, qui, quo, and cuius. Okay, H is barely pronounced. So Homo sapiens is how you correctly pronounce that term. You don't say Homo sapiens. If you're pronouncing it in Latin, Homo sapiens. T is pronounced as che if followed by E or I, like chi, che, cello, cellum, cellorumque. Tita, tivitas. T followed by A, O, or U is pronounced as K, like coexistentialism, okay? Or cornu, corpia, cornu, or campus, or curiositatis. That's a Latin word. Similarly, G followed by E or I is pronounced as J, like gerum gerere, gerere bellum, to wage war. G followed by E or I is J or G. Agibilium, agilitas. But followed by A, O, or U is strong G, like gara, gambit, gander. So G followed by A, O, or U, ga, go, and gu. Okay? As I said, there's no other better way to learn the pronunciation than actually reading and pronouncing correctly Latin. Now, here is where you can distinguish between someone who studied Latin and then will start quoting Latin or use Latin quotations in speeches from someone who did not learn Latin and just, start putting in Latin quotations in their text. T followed by I and another vowel is pronounced as C, like in gratia. Gratias tibi is thanks to you in Latin, or that's the way to say thank you. Ago tibi, gratias. I give you thanks. See you, like spatium, space, time. Spatium vere penitentiae. You see the TS, like suddenly there is a letter S appearing. Theo, like institutionis. You see, someone who didn't learn Latin properly or correctly, when quoting using these Latin quotations, will pronounce it as institutionis. That means he didn't learn, she didn't learn Latin. SC followed by a vowel, I or E, becomes SC becomes like scientia, for example. Scitum, citis. GN, again, this is where you can distinguish between someone who actually learned Latin properly or simply is using them to quote in speeches. GN is always enye, like magna cum laude. Someone who didn't learn Latin will say magna cum laude. But you now who have learned, who have started learning Latin pronunciation, you will say magna cum laude, magnificentia, magnificent. That's Latin for magnificent. Okay, so here are some words to practice. Angelus is angel. Baptisma, altare, Catholicus, Christianus. Now, this is not Tianus because it is preceded by the letter S. By the way, there are many exceptions in Latin. Sometimes there are more exceptions to the rule than those that actually follow the rules themselves. So that's something to take note of. Consubstantialis, okay? Not consubstantialis, that's anglicized, that's American, that's not Latin anymore. Consubstantialis, directus, holocaustum. Take note, I didn't say holocaustum, it's holocaustum. The letter H is hardly pronounced. Ostia, again, preceded by letter S, so you don't have to say ostia. No, it's ostia. Humanus, hymnus. Now, you see letter J appearing in many texts, but now that you have studied Latin pronunciation, alphabet, I told you J does not exist in Latin. It is replaced by letter I. Therefore, number 12 is judicialis. Judicialis, not judicialis, because J doesn't exist, but judicialis. Justus, just. Signum, not signum, because G and N pronounces N. Signum, and then persona. Okay, we will get into more pronunciations when we look at actual texts. Now, something unique in Latin are what we call the diphthongs. Diphthongs, two vowels that follow each other. If A is followed by E, that is pronounced as E. Like in Cesar, Cesare. O followed by E is also pronounced as E, like in celum, heaven. Celestial in English, right? That's where we get the word celestial. By the way, more than 60% of the English words come from Latin. That's why study Latin and you will have a better chance of perfecting your English, as what happened to me when I was in high school. By the way, I learned my Latin from high school. We had 4 years of Latin in Southridge, first to fourth year high school. But I learned more, I learned better the language when I started teaching it. 2 years after high school, I started teaching Latin to students, to teachers, to other professionals. Iya, I followed by A, is like as if there's a letter Y in between the two, like in patria, country or fatherland. That's where we also get the word pater, father, patria. Iyo, I followed by O, is pronounced as iyo, like legio, actio, nuncio, annuncio. U followed by A, like as if there is a W in between uwa, as in tua. And U followed by I is uwi, like as if there is a W between you and I, like genuine. Okay? So, as I said, there's no other better way to perfect your translation than through reading of texts. You listen to how I'm going to read this text, and then you will start getting the drift of the diphthongs, and the C followed by E is che, C, G followed by I, or E is je, but O followed by A, O, or U, it's ga, go, and gu. Okay, et manducantibus ilis, here's another point, by the way, ilis is pronounced like one L, okay? It's not like in Spanish, again, Elia. Ilis, accepit Jesus panem et benedicens fregit et dedit eis et ait sumite, hoc est corpus meum, et accepto calice, gratias agens dedit eis, et biberunt ex illo omnes, et ait ilis, hic est sanguis meius, Novi Testamenti qui pro multis effunditur. Amen dico vobis quod iam non viva, de genimine vitis usque in diem illum cum illud bibam novum in regno Dei. Okay? Let me see. Let us, okay. So, there are so many texts available. One of the things, let me just put in mute si Ailey, okay? Okay, good. So, as I said, there is no other better way to perfect your pronunciation than by going through texts, and then along the way, you will learn better how to pronounce things. Let's pause a bit from pronunciation. We will see more texts later on, and when you take note of how I read them, those things register and you remember them. When you talk of Roman stuff, we owed we owe the Romans a lot in terms of architecture, aesthetics, beauty, because they were the ones who built all those basilicas, cathedrals, churches that have withstood the test of time, and they still are up to now. Okay, well, there are three types of Roman columns. When you say classical Roman architecture, the simplest is the Doric, and in fact, that's the first one that they invented, that they designed. And then a bit more complex is the Ionic column. And then they made it more aesthetical and more beautiful, more sophisticated with a Corinthian. And I usually would ask my students to go around Manila and spot the different columns that they see if they follow any of these classical designs, whether they are Doric columns, Ionic columns, or Corinthian. Here is an example of very, very popular building. I think this is the Virginia Capitol here in the US, which uses Doric columns. And then another capital in one of the states that follows Ionic column. You go to National Museum in Manila, and you're going to see there the beautiful Corinthian columns in front, and the very tragic destruction that happened in the Philippines, the burning of the post office, which is supposed to be one of the most beautiful buildings we have there. Now, no more. It's destroyed by fire, and it has the Ionic columns. Okay, so along the way in the course of learning Latin, these are just some of the Roman culture, Roman erudition, Roman like contribution to culture that we will be studying. Architecture, columns, the gladiatorial fights, Romulus, Remus, the aqueducts, etc., etc. There are just so many things, fascinating things to learn from the Romans. I don't know, for example, if you've ever wondered why we call yung sa SM Arena, yan, or the Philippine Arena, which in fact is wrong use of the word arena, because arena comes from the Latin word, arena comes from the Latin word arena, which means sand, buhangin. And you know why they call the Colosseum, for example, an arena? Because after gladiatorial fights, they have to clean the place for the next rounds of fights or shows or spectacles, coming from the Latin word spectacula. Specto, spectare is to watch, to look at. Now, spectacles, they were very fond of spectacles, and they would use those arenas. But gladiatorial fights would be so bloody. There was even one, for example, where 18,000 gladiators, it was a big feast. And that was the way the emperor would distract the people, by giving them circus and bread. You've heard of that, no? And instead of cleaning, washing away the blood, the bloodbath, because of the bloodbath that had just happened, it was easier to simply cover the place with another layer of arena, sand. And that's why they became known as arenas. The Colosseum is an arena because of the word arena, covering the ground with a layer of sand. So that doesn't happen in Mall of Asia arena. They don't have to cover it with sand. That's why I said, technically speaking, it's a wrong term to describe the place as arena. It's a coliseum. It's a spectacle site for spectacle, but really, it is not an arena following the technical term of sand. Okay, some ideas about learning Latin. Nouns first. English nouns, very simple, no? We only have three types: masculine nouns, feminine nouns, and the neuter nouns. And the way to determine is simply, if it refers to a woman, feminine noun. If it refers to a man, it's a masculine noun. If it refers to a thing, then it's a neuter noun. Not in the case of Latin. In the case of Latin, every noun would usually have a gender. Generally, yes, if it refers to a man, it must be masculine. If it refers to a woman, it must be feminine. But it doesn't necessarily follow that rule. And there are 5 families of nouns. A noun may belong to one group. Let's call it declension. And there are 5 of them. So there is the first declension nouns, the second declension nouns, the third declension nouns, the fourth declension nouns, and the fifth declension nouns. And they belong to that specific declension because it will have to be declined in a particular way. Okay? Which, well, this is one of the first hard things for students to memorize, to work on, because every noun in Latin would have 5 cases in singular and 5 cases in plural. By case, we mean change the ending of the word, it takes on a specific case. And it takes on a different meaning. If it is a subject, the subject of the sentence, that's one ending of the noun. If it is possessive form, like of the woman, of the man, or the man apostrophe s, as in possessive s, that's another case. If it is indirect object, that is another case. If it is direct object of the sentence, that will have another ending. And if it is like by the man, from the man, that's another case. And that's only singular. We also put it into plural. Every noun will have 10 forms, 5 cases in singular, 5 cases in plural. But once you memorize those, then it's very easy to put any noun in whatever form it is supposed to be in the sentence. That's why one of the fruits of learning Latin is it's supposed to develop discipline of the mind. You will have to be very disciplined. Is it the first case, the second case, or the third case? Is it the singular or the plural? What is its function in the sentence? Is it the subject, possessive, indirect object, direct object, or object of preposition by or from or with, etc.? It's challenging. It can be challenging. And that's only one declension. Now you multiply that by 5 declensions. As I said, those are the 5 different forms. That's another challenging thing to study in Latin. And they are given a name. Is it the subject of the sentence? Let's call it the nominative case or the nominative form of the noun. Is it possessive? Let's call it the genitive case. Is it indirect object? To whom or for whom something is done? Then let's call it the dative object or dative case. Is it the direct object of the sentence, receiver of the action? Then it becomes accusative case. Is it object of preposition with or by or from? Then let's call it the ablative case. That's all about the nouns. And then multiply this again, as I said, by 2 singular and plural sets, and by 5, multiply that by 5 for the 5 different declensions. As for the verbs in Latin, this is one of the most challenging things for Filipinos in learning Latin. Why? Because in Tagalog, we basically have only 3 tenses: present, perfect, future. Pang nagdaan, pangkasalukuyan, panghinaharap. Yun lang, ano? Those are the only 3. Now we have, in Latin, first, we have 4 families of verbs. As in the nouns, there are 5 families or 5 groups or 5 sets. In Latin, the verbs may belong either to first conjugation or second conjugation or third conjugation or fourth. That are 4 conjugations. And this is one of the biggest challenges in learning Latin. We don't just have 3 tenses, we have 6 tenses in Latin. Verbs come in present form, which can be 2 things, 2 types: present progressive or the simple present. And then there's such a thing as imperfect tense, which in English comes in 2 forms. The past progressive, I was eating, he was dancing, you were reading, the was or were plus ing form. Or the used to form, I used to live there, he used to eat here, we used to see each other, the used to form. That's the imperfect tense. The future is very simple as we know it in English. I will eat, you will eat, he will eat. Or I will be eating, you will be eating, he will be eating. Perfect tense in English comes in 2 forms. The simple past, I ate, you ate. Or the has or have, what we call in English the present perfect tense. I have eaten, he has danced, we have read, you have seen. That's a perfect. So Latin perfect tense translated in 2 possible ways: simple past or the has or have form, the present perfect form. Pluperfect, which does not exist in Tagalog, and in English, only the sophisticated speakers, the advanced speakers in English are able to use the pluperfect. I mean, for us Filipinos who's, well, English many times really more common is the second language, no? And it does not exist in Tagalog. That's why many Filipinos have a tough time using the pluperfect tense. It's simply the past perfect tense, like had eaten. When do you use it? For example, when you are referring to 2 past events, but you want to express the other one as happening earlier than the other one. Like, I had already eaten when mother arrived. I had already eaten. In Tagalog, it does not exist. That's why many times Filipinos will say, I already ate. I already ate when mother arrived. Wrong grammar actually yun. Because you're supposed to say, had eaten already by the time he came. Or we had already talked with each other when you called, meaning to say the talking with each other happened earlier than the calling. Two past events, but you're expressing one as having happened earlier, then that becomes pluperfect tense. And then there's another one that does not exist in Tagalog, and even many times English speakers also are not able to use correctly the so-called future perfect tense, meaning to say you're saying that in the future something would be finished, would have, shall have. That's the future perfect. As I said, it also does not exist in Tagalog, so many Filipinos have a tough time using this correctly. By 9 a.m. tomorrow, I shall have eaten breakfast. You're expressing something being finished in the future perfect tense. So those are the 6 tenses in Latin. As you can see, it's not as simple as past, present, and future. Okay? Okay, good. Let us now learn a bit of vocabulary. As I said earlier, 60, or sometimes some experts even say more than 60% of the English words have their root in Latin. That's why perfect your Latin, you will be more perfect in your English. Here are words in Latin where, if you notice, change the ending to ate, ate, and that's already the English word. These are all Latin words. Separare, which in English we have separate, and that's what it means to separate. Elevare, to elevate. Resuscitare. Take note of the S and the C followed by the I. It's pronounced as letter SH. Resuscitare. Supplicare. Venerari. This is passive. That's why it is in ari instead of are. But the same, we have English word to venerate. Illuminare. That's a Latin word. And that's where we get the word English illuminate. Immolare. Immolate. Liberare. To liberate. Commemorare. To commemorate. Comunicare. To communicate. Cooperare. To cooperate. Celebrare. To celebrate. Creare. Create. Decorare. To decorate. Cremare. To cremate. Donare. To donate. Expiare. To expiate. It's an English word. Cogitare. To cogitate. But we don't usually use it anymore. We say to think. Congregare. To congregate. You see, learn Latin and you will have a better chance of perfecting your English. Those are all Latin words ending in are. Change the are to eight, and you already have the English word. And there are so many more that are like that. Okay, good. Now we go to something basic. You know, when you learn a language, what is one of the first things usually you learn? To count, right? I mean, that's one of the first things we are taught, how to count. Well, let me give you now how to count at least 1 to 10. Unus, which comes in 3 genders actually. Unus, una, unum. Like alumnus, alumna. And then later on, you're going to learn that alumnus, masculine, Alumna, feminine. Plural, alumni, alumni in English. And feminine, plural, alumnae, AE. You will see the distinction when we start declining. Unus, two, duo. There is also a feminine, due. There is also a neuter form, dua. And the good news is, after this, no more changing of endings. Everything is the same. Tres, as you know it in Spanish. Quatuor, as you know, very closely related to cuatro of Spanish. By the way, Spanish came from Latin. And that's why when you learn Latin, and then later on you study Spanish, you will find that, wow, it's much easier. Spanish is far, far easier to learn than Latin because it came from Latin. 5 is quinque. 6 is sex. 7 is septem. 8 is octo. 9 is novem. And 10 is decem. And then you start seeing, yeah, that's right, connections. Septem, 7, septuagenarian, 70, 70s. Octo, as in octopus, has 8 tentacles. Octogenarian, 80, 80s. The person is on his 80s. 9, novem. That's where we get the word novena. 9 days of praying for the dead. Novena. 10, decem, as in Decapolis, decem, deca. Decathlon has 10 events. Now, some of you are wondering, okay, 7 September. Ano nangyari? Bakit September is not the 7th month? It's the 9th month. October is not the 8th month. It's the 10th month. November is not the 9th. It's the 11th. And December is not the 10th. It's the 12th. Bakit may difference of 2? Of course, you know what happened. Julius Caesar said, I have to be immortalized. I want to be included in the calendar. So Julius became part of the calendar. And Augustus said, teka muna, ako rin, I should also be immortalized. I should also be in the calendar. So everything moved by 2 down. That's why September is not the 7th, it's the 9th month. October now is not the 8th month of the year, it's the 10th. And November is not anymore the 9th month, it's the 11th, etc. Interesting to study these things. Okay, so you have this unus, duo, tres, quatuor, quinque, sex, septem, octo, novem, decem. And we will, well, I don't intend to continue on with the undecim, duodecim, tridecim, quatuordecim, the 11, 12, 13, 14. That would be for another time to look into. Okay, so then, this is just the introductory course, and this is just to give you an idea. What I intend to do is, in the next session, we're actually going to tackle the first declension, the first declension nouns, in fact, where once I start giving you vocabulary words, you start seeing practically every word that we're going to study in Latin has been incorporated into English one way or another. Like when you say nauta, uy, sailor, that's where we get nautical miles. When you see, of course, the proper nouns are all as they are in English, like Maria or Roma or Italia or Africa. When you see those words, they are directly incorporated into the English language. Okay, so as I said, there is no other better way to learn the pronunciation than going through texts and then listening to how it is correctly pronounced, and then you will be able to master very quickly your pronunciation, which we will also do. I mean, as we go through translations of texts, then you will be able to, um, I mean, it becomes very natural sooner or later about the gaje jigogu and the kache chikoku and tia, tia, etc. All those things will become very natural. A warning, as I mentioned somehow at the start of the session, most of the materials you're going to find in learning Latin online are following the classical or Roman or anglicized pronunciations. Okay, which, as I mentioned, for those of you who came in after the first few minutes that we started, I am not going to use them. I'm going to use ecclesiastical or church pronunciation because that's the more common that you hear. Talking about hearing, something you need to keep in mind is Latin is a spoken language, even if no one speaks it nowadays. I mean, in fact, what I'm going to cover in this course is how to read Latin texts, not how to speak it. We're not going to study Latin as a spoken language, although there are ways of being able to do that. The Police method developed in Jerusalem, for example, is a great way to learn Latin. But we're not going to study it as a spoken language in this course. After all, you really cannot speak with too many people. I know there are very few still trying to develop it as a spoken language. The other thing is, many people say Latin is a dead language, okay? Dead precisely because there are not too many people anymore speaking it. Well, because not too many people are speaking it, that's why it has become fixed. It does not evolve like the English language continues to evolve. It does not evolve like the Tagalog language, for example. The Filipino language is evolving. We are adding new nuances, new words, new vocabulary because we continue using it. But Latin remains the same. The Latin I'm going to teach you is the Latin that was spoken by Julius Caesar 2,000 years ago, spoken by the Romans at the time of Jesus, and it has not changed. That's why, rather than calling it dead language, I usually prefer to call it the immortal language because it does not evolve anymore, it's fixed. That's the advantage of the fact that it is not anymore a spoken language. It is fixed, it is still there. Okay, so that's what I intend to do in this course. And in the well, as I mentioned, in the many of you who sent a question in the Facebook page or in the email asking, about how much is this whole course if we're going to take the whole course. That's practically the question that was posted by so many. Okay. Um, the first three that we are doing, which are today, next week, and the week after that. Next week, I'm going to give you the session from New York. I am now in Washington, D.C., which explains the sunlight behind me. But by the time I reach the third session, that's November 18, I will already be back in Malate, Manila. Okay, so next week is going to be from New York. And then January, February, and March is when we actually have the full course, which includes all these in the list. 20 hours of synchronous or live sessions, and the time will have to be determined according to the most convenient among the majority of those who will be enrolled in the course. And as soon as you enroll, you will be given these 5 main sources, main books that will be used in the study of Latin. Willox Latin is one of the most commonly used materials in the study of Latin, especially on the grammar part. And then the Latin, Willox Latin Reader, also very useful. And along the way, while I am teaching Latin, according to the ecclesiastical pronunciation, it's not ecclesiastical. I mean, I'm not going to be teaching the Novum Testamentum or the Biblia as the main source. The translations, when we reach the translation part, will include speeches of Cicero, if you want to pronounce it according to Latin, or the poems of Horace and Ovid and Virgil, Aeneid of Virgil. Those also will be included in the translation work. But the 20 hours would not be enough to cover everything about grammar, but enough for anyone who wants to proceed to higher studies of Latin to be able to actually do actual translations of classical works. The basic grammar that we will be covering would be more than enough for you to do a self-study on your own. And then, of course, along the way, as I said, there will be a lot of sprinkling of Roman culture, civilization, and what we call erudition. Studying Latin for erudition. Okay, so the question of how much is it again? The one of the most popular materials available online is this Latin 101, learning a classical language, but it's all recordings. The 20-hour sessions I will be giving are going to be live. And as I mentioned at the start of the session today, at any point, please feel free to type your question if you have any question in the chat box. And they charge as much as $339.95. That's around 18. And how much is that? Well, almost 20,000 pesos. And I found one of the most used tutorial courses on Latin, making it available for 18,000 pesos. But again, these are, an advantage of this is it's a one-on-one kind of course. Okay, so what appeared in the advertisement for this course for the January to March, that is the full course is 20 hours from January to March, 15,000. However, well, I decided to cut it down to half for those who will enroll by November 11. That's only 7,500 for all the 20 hours January to March. But by November 18, if you pay by November 18 or before that, then it's 8,500. and we'll see what happens after November 18. Otherwise, the first 3 sessions are totally free, and you are not obliged to enroll in this course that will happen January to March. Okay, this only for those who really want to pursue it. Well, based on what you have seen today, how it can be helpful for you, or how it can be beneficial for your personal or professional growth. Okay, well, it's 8:55. As I said, for those who came in late, the recording is going to be made available. For those who may be interested, you can ask for a link to the recording from catalystpds@gmail.com. Okay, well, we will end for now this session, and feel free to join us next week, Saturday, evening for you, morning for me in New York, for the second session on Latin for erudition. Okay, you can have a copy of the slides that I showed today, the same by emailing, send an email to, I might as well type it here, although many of you are familiar because you, I think, received your link, the Zoom link for this session through this email, catalystpds@gmail.com. Okay, so if you're interested to get a copy of the slides that we used today, feel free to request for it in that email address, and that I'm also going to pass on. Those of you who are interested to start practicing your pronunciation, I can pass you the Novum Testamentum, the whole New Testament in Latin to practice. Okay, Ago TV, gracias. Thank you so much for joining us, and hope you can join us again in the future. We're going to end this Zoom meeting in 5. Thank you, everyone. Bye. Have a great evening. And my day is just starting here today. Bye.